What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meets Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners. Don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meets Sperm. My guest today is Dr. Allison Freeman. She is a naturopathic doctor in family practice for 12 years in Toronto, Canada. She has a background in environmental sciences before transitioning her interest on the impacts of environmental toxicities on human health. She's a member of the National Association for Environmental Medicine, and her medical practice has an emphasis on lowering the body's environmental body burden with its impacts on fertility, bone health, and well-being in the postmenopausal years. Hello and welcome. So excited to have you here today.
Thank you for hosting me, Omatma. It's nice to be
Yes,
here.
yes, absolutely. So we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I really am intrigued by this idea of a total toxin body burden. Can you tell us more about what that means and where is that coming from?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, the total body burden is a concept that was developed to encompass the fact that we have environmental toxins in our bodies from a wide range of sources. And some estimates suggest that we are exposed to over 80,000 different toxins on a daily basis. And
Wait, what? Can you
yeah,
say that number
80,000.
again? What?
And
Oh
so
my God.
a lot of them we are exposed to in really minute quantities. So a tiny bit of lead and a little bit of mercury, arsenic, formaldehyde, PCBs, flame retardants, benzenes, pesticides, and they're all micro doses. But in research, it's very difficult to study the interactions between all of these different layers of chemicals and how and metals and non-metal pollutants, how they interact in our body and what is the total load on the organs that we use to excrete, like namely like our digestive tract, our kidney, our liver, and through breathing, excreting waste through breath. So the total body burden is to encompass the fact that, our bodies are burdened with all of these toxins and it can impact the normal processes of how our cells generate energy. And mammals
Mm-hmm.
tend to store toxins for the main part in fat tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So this is important to note because women will offload 50% of their total body burden in the first 6 months of breastfeeding.
Mm.
So I'm not by any means saying don't breastfeed, but the preconception phase offers an opportunity to detox fat tissue in particular to reduce the body burden before conception.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to break this down a little bit more because it's really cool stuff. Um, so basically, you're saying we are accumulating this burden through day-to-day life. A
Yes.
lot of it is accumulated in micro doses over the course of a day, but then it's building and it's often building in our fat tissue. And the only way to excrete it would be the digestive system, the liver, the like kidneys and breathing and skin. I think you said skin
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
the skin actually is a wonderful way to excrete certain toxins because we can sweat toxins through, and that's actually a very safe way to get rid of toxins. So for example, the kidneys try and get rid of arsenic. It might take up to 16 years to get it out through the kidneys, but we can more effectively excrete it through sweat
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
sweating is done safely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
And then, and the key point that you said was that you're going to offload 50% of your total toxin burden onto your child
Poor firstborn
through
born.
breastfeeding. Like, that seems really interesting to me because from a survival perspective, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would we do this? But that's like more maybe a metaphysical question. Like my brain is going, what?
Yeah, breastfeeding is a great
Yes.
detox for a woman, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness. But in order to prevent that our child is inheriting 50% of our toxin burden, we can really like prepare for that through preconception time.
Absolutely, that preconception phase is really key. And I'll add that from 1973 to 2011, the rate of sperm decline was 1.64% per year when they looked at a meta-analysis, and that looked at 44 different worldwide studies. So they were looking at men of all ages from all continents in the world. And when they compile the data, that was the average decline of sperm per year. So over the last 60 years, there's been a decline of 50%.
Mm-hmm.
In the sperm. And so now we're at like 49 million per mil.
Mm-hmm.
And so since the sperm are regenerated every 4 months from start to finish, there's that opportunity to detoxify to enhance the sperm quality. So it's not just about the breast milk for women, but also for men to reduce the body burden through, doing an audit of the home and the diet and lifestyle and, workplace exposures to maintain better quality sperm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that like the trends on sperm are very interesting because I think the latest I heard was like if we keep going at the rate we're going in 20 years, there most men will be azoospermic, meaning they have zero sperm.
Yeah, so I was going to add also that since 2011, the rate of decline per year of sperm went from 1.6 to 2.5% decrease per
Mm.
year. So the threshold for the sperm was between 40 and 50. So we're already in that threshold. So 2.5% a year, I mean, that could be even like less
Yeah.
than 20 years, unfortunately. So the imperative, this is a big public health issue. And so the onus is on individuals to really become aware of what they can do in their lives to optimize the sperm quality. And
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think is like driving this um sperm decline, but then also like on the female side, equal issues are happening with fertility. So I'm curious what you think is like the driver behind all of this.
I think this comes down again to the load, because this generation is exposed to more toxins on a daily basis than
Mm-hmm.
60 years ago. And so the organs of elimination can't keep up. So I've heard that 70% of the toxins come from food, from additives, pesticides, glyphosate, et cetera. 5 to 10% from personal care products, and then from water, from workplace. But that 70% is from food.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily just the endocrine disruptors, but but the total toxic body burden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious from your like environmental background opinion,
Mhm.
do you feel like eating quote unquote organic food is enough to
That's a very good question. That's a very tough thing to answer because,
I
We,
like asking all the tough
oh
questions
yeah,
because
because even in rainwater, we have toxins, and all organic food is still going to have exposures from rainwater. But yes, I think that having organic where possible for certain categories of food, like the Dirty Dozen that the Environmental Working Group puts out, is valuable. I didn't know like previously that kale, which we think of as a superfood, is one of the Dirty Dozens, and apples, you think an apple a day. So organic can reduce the load. Um, However, if we look at the category of, since mammals store toxins and fat, it's not just humans. If you
yeah.
have like butter, that cow is also storing toxins in butter. So you have to think about the fact that organic butter is going to have a high toxic load.
Oh,
In
interesting.
terms of looking at the total amount of PCBs and arsenic, et cetera, when you look at a total
Yeah.
score, animal products that have high fat should be prioritized as well in the preconception phase.
Mm. Should be prioritized to
To
consume
buy as
more
to
of
consume in organic
in
forms. Yeah,
organic forms. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
And would so that brings up a really interesting question because we're expanding this out of humans to all mammals. So then are we, as we eat or drink or consume dairy in particular, are cows also offloading 50% of their toxin burden into breast milk, which is essentially what we're consuming as humans?
That's a very good point. Yeah, essentially, they are, anytime you've got fat in animal fat in a food, then
Yeah.
that's offloading their toxic burden. So if
Oh
we're
my
at the
God.
top of the food chain, if you're eating, say, um, a large fish, like, you know, tuna, or, there's a much higher
Yeah.
toxic level than
Yeah.
having a sardine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So consuming smaller fish
Yeah. So we're not even,
would be
we're
a
going
wiser
beyond
thing.
mammals now. We're getting into the
Right.
seafood
Like
world.
literally anything that you're consuming of animal origin, we were really thinking of the lower on the food chain, the better.
You got it.
And like I've always felt this way. I don't know if you agree with this, but I don't suggest dairy consumption at all. Um, but like what you just said has got me like mind blown moment of like holy shit, like people that are like, well, my dairy is all organic and it comes from A1 cows and blah 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 and blah blah blah, and it's still going to be loaded with toxins. Like
Yes.
even if you've done all of that, it's still going to, because that is the way that mammals excrete a huge amount of their toxin load.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, the reason I mentioned butter is because if you do like to eat butter, then you might want to go for organic, but just being conscious that the more animal fats that are consumed in the diet, that will increase the total body burden.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay, most of the listeners are probably like, this is not that interesting, but to me, I'm like, holy shit, this is blowing my mind because, like, wow, the impact of what you are saying is like way larger than I have considered or thought about from that perspective. So,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Um, I'm curious what other things might be contributing to total toxin burden. So we've talked about these like 80,000 toxins that were exposed in microdoses throughout the day. What else? Are there other things that are adding to this total burden?
Yeah, I'll give an example. So in one of them that isn't really stored in fat, but is stored more in bone, is lead. And this is
Mm,
common in the tap water of older homes, of um, towns and cities where they have older infrastructure
mhm,
for delivering water, is the old pipes were lead. And so the lead transfers from the pipe to the water to the human. And this
mm,
deposits in bone. And so the key is, whatever the lead there is to sort of actually just try and keep it there and not let it escape. Um, So making sure during the pregnancy that there is not a decrease in bone density, that the woman is getting enough calcium and bone building ingredients so that she doesn't offload that lead in the pregnancy to the baby.
Hmm.
So, you know, if that's why postpartum women often get cavities if they're not
Mm-hmm.
getting enough
Mm-hmm.
bone building nutrients during the pregnancy. So the impetus is about keeping the bones strong, getting that exercise, and making sure the bones stay strong so that it's not being transferred to the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we are
That's
getting it from all kinds of sources. I could give an example for a lot of different toxins. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, because bone loss in pregnancy and postpartum is actually a really big issue. And it's like less uncommon. That's a weird way to say it. It's very common. uh, and I think we're not often thinking of it. So I think it's really important to just like be more aware and sure you're going to the dentist and make sure that you're like keeping checks and balances to not potentially increase the amount of bone loss that you're going to have. And
Yeah,
it's
that's
going to
right.
happen regardless because you're passing off nutrients to the baby. Like
Hmm.
it to a certain extent it's like quote unquote unavoidable, but I think what you're saying is just like you can to a certain degree mitigate it and like over support your body with certain nutrients so that when the loss happens your body doesn't need to lose as much.
Yeah, exactly. So you're right. The word mitigating makes a lot of sense. I mean, we live in a toxic world. We have to accept that fact that we just need to find strategies that are going to minimize transfer in a negative way
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that the the nutrients are coming as much from the woman's food sources instead of from her own body reserves of
Yeah.
minerals so
Yeah.
that she's not offloading her body burden
Mm-hmm.
during the
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy.
Do you have favorite ways to support calcium and minerals that would generally be thought of as like bone building, but are also going to help during pregnancy to mitigate that loss?
Well, in past decades, the common advice was drink more milk, right? But
Brilliant.
we now know that there's a lot more to bones and bone density than
Mm,
just consuming milk, right?
right.
And we're looking more at making sure the body is not in an acidic state. Um, and one of my, you know, um, agricultural background, medical docs would say is, get calcium the same place the cows do, which is your leafy greens. Have lots of leafy greens in the diet, like make sure
Yeah.
there's, sesame, tahini, broccoli, lots of greens, and keep the body in that more alkaline state so that the body isn't leaching from the bones.
Mm,
Mhm.
okay. Brilliant. I love that. Okay, so we've talked about toxins as body burden. Are there other things like we were kind of mentioning about potentially infections also contributing to this like things that your body has to deal with essentially?
Yeah, and so with this, because we're talking about environmental, uh, with climate change, we are seeing a spread of certain infections into wider geographic ranges. So, for example, Lyme disease is one such example where it was originally diagnosed in Lyme, Connecticut over 100 years ago, and now it's seen on multiple continents and broader geographic areas. Every year, the maps are in the region where I live. They spread the volume. I'm not the volume, the geographic area of where it's showing up, and this can have implications for fertility, for pregnancy, and for the postpartum phase.
Oh, I was on mute. Yeah, say more about that. So, what do you believe in your experience is like contributing to this like geographical climate change related uprise of infections?
That's a really good question. So, as the Earth gets a little bit warmer, so the geographic range of certain bugs and ticks, for example, gets to be a broader area. So they might go
Mm,
a little further north, a little further west, and so they're occupying bigger niches. And so Lyme is particularly uh, troublesome because once a woman's pregnant, it can no longer be detected
mm,
because the immune system in pregnancy is depressed so that the mother doesn't reject the fetus, right? So there are those immune regulators that suppress certain aspects of immunity in pregnancy for the mother. And
mhm,
one of those that's suppressed is the detection of the presence of the Lyme disease.
hmm,
And so it becomes more important to try and screen for it as a preconception phase
mhm,
because the Lyme disease is associated with more complications in pregnancy. It's associated with a higher rate of stillbirths and also developmental delays of the offspring. So
mm,
it should really become a mandatory pre-screen before
right,
conception if one lives in a zone of North America where that is an issue.
right.
And
And so currently, like, what is the range? Because so I went to naturopathic school in Connecticut, which is Lyme country,
yeah,
right? So I saw tons of Lyme cases there. And then I moved to California eventually, where it's still prevalent, but it's less prevalent than Connecticut for sure. So I've been a little bit more distant from all the Lyme stuff more recently. So I'm curious, like, where is like the start and end of that range of
yeah. So it changes a little bit each year. For instance, we're noticing in Canada that it's very prevalent in the Ottawa area, which is the capital of Canada. And then each year it gets closer and closer to Toronto, which is 5 hours away. And so there's a spread each year. But
interesting.
basically in the US, it's a lot in the Northeast, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also extending, through Ohio and then, in the prairies and it can be found in a lot of forested areas,
Mm,
not desert though. um, in Berlin, for example, 50% of the public parks have had Lyme sightings. So it's becoming an issue not just in North America. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been detected in thousands of years ago, but now the geographic range is spreading.
Mm,
Hmm.
wow,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, you talked about it goes kind of underground during pregnancy, and then does Lyme like come back in like not come back, but more detectable again in the postpartum
You
phase?
got it. Yeah. So it can be detected in the women in the postpartum phase with the changes of the immune system several months after pregnancy. If
Interesting.
women has it, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it can
And
transmit to the baby in
okay, yeah,
utero.
that was
Yeah.
exactly you got it. That was where my brain was going. So, how the presence of Lyme, maybe during preconception, kind of undetectable in pregnancy, and then reemergence in postpartum, how will that impact the health of the baby?
Yeah. So There can be developmental delays that can resemble autistic type of symptoms. And a colleague of mine who works in a clinic where they were focusing on autism, once they started realizing that the Lyme disease could mimic it, they started realizing like, oh, we can treat these kids and then their symptoms could
Hmm.
resolve. So early detection is important.
And are they treating them more naturopathically or more like antibiotics, like the more conventional approach?
This was a naturopathic clinic,
Hmm.
but often it's treated in an integrative setting
Hmm.
in collaboration with medical doctors too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then have you, I like, since I started like doing mostly fertility, I haven't seen that many Lyme cases, except for a few clients who knew they had Lyme when they came in, had a whole slew of symptoms related to Lyme, but also were struggling getting pregnant. So I'm curious if you've seen like there's this relationship between the two, and I haven't dug into it enough to honestly to know, but I feel like inherently something is going on where the immune system activation is causing it, making it harder for women to get pregnant and stay pregnant once they have Lyme.
Yeah, I haven't been able to get a lot of good data in the
Hmm.
literature on this, but
Hmm.
anecdotally in my own practice, I have seen some really tricky fertility cases where, the woman has regulated everything else and this has become an underlying issue.
Yeah.
Even if the woman wasn't presenting with symptoms, but there was still positive for Lyme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. And again, like this could probably be like its own slew of research that we need to dig into is like how is this actually impacting fertility? Because in intuitively, I'm like, I'm sure it's doing something. But in reality, like there isn't a lot to go off of. So yeah. Um Fascinating stuff. Um so I am, as we come towards the end of our episode together, I'm curious if you have like some words of wisdom for living in the world that we live in, which is obviously a little more toxic than it was 50 years ago. But not going into like freak out or overwhelm around that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we going into freak out mode and feeling as though we need to live in a bubble is also not helpful. Drinking out of only plastic bottles instead of drinking out of the tap water is not necessarily a healthy adaptation, and not leaving the house. But I think that knowledge can also be empowering, of like knowing what you can integrate into your lifestyle in an ongoing basis that's not going to feel like a burden, but will still make an impact in lowering that body burden, and feeling that you have the capacity to make these changes and have better fertility outcomes in terms of doing a home audit, a review of where they might be coming from in the diet, personal care products, um, even the routes that we walk on, and not taking the main street where you're getting exposed to more exhaust, and maybe taking a side street where there's less car pollution. And even small changes can reduce the body burden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. You know what so this is like going back to so many questions ago, but we didn't talk about it, so we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
I just realized that I didn't ask you in that preconception period. And I ask everyone that we talk about toxins the same question, by the way, because I'm curious how everyone else is holding all of this as a provider, as a practitioner, what you're advising your clients to do. So as as you're working with preconception phase, is there an optimal amount of time that you need them to finish their detox before they can start trying to conceive? And what is that time period?
Oh, that's such a good question. So it kind of depends on whether they are doing detox protocols that are actively excreting toxins, say from the sweat. So for instance, if there is a medically supervised detox through infrared sauna, for example, it's been recommended to stop that process at least 2 months before trying to conceive
Mm-hmm.
for women, because it can elevate those toxins in the bloodstream and circulation and they can move to other places. And so you want that to all sort of be settled before attempting conception.
Perfect. Yeah. Um, so period of time, there's a lot of variation in what people have said. So we're somewhere between like 2 and 4 months ish is the average that I've noticed, or at least what people have told me. So
Yeah, in terms of like an active detox period, but for things like, eating less out of plastic containers,
sure.
especially for
Yeah.
acidic foods like ketchup and tomato sauce, where the the acid from the food will actually leach from the plastic. Those
Hmm.
kinds of things can be done like,
Right
through
up.
conception and
Yeah.
pre-pregnancy. There's no need to like stop that kind of protocol.
Right,
I'm just
right.
referring to actively trying to discharge those toxins from the body.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And then do you have any, I know that, and this should be medically supervised. I heard you say that too. So we're not, please, please, please do not go to your nearest Whole Foods or health food store and pick up a detox kit. Like, oh my God. But I'm curious, like, what do you like to do with your clients as a form of detox, like actively detoxing?
Um, well, a nice first step is I always make sure that people can poop, because if there's constipation, it's like when you clean up your house and then you leave all the garbage at the front door and it's not exiting the house. You need to be able to excrete properly so that the toxins don't get recirculated through the body.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so ensuring that there's, really good bowel function is a nice step one.
Yeah.
Introducing appropriate supplements to help the health of the mitochondria, which
Mhm.
they're the powerhouse inside every cell that generate
Mhm.
energy, and make sure that they are optimally generating energy. And, just supporting the body to sweat in a healthy way. Sometimes
Mhm.
people can't sweat, it takes
Mhm.
time. It's like a workout, it takes time to develop that ability.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Other things I do is I integrate intravenous glutathione to help the body to detoxify, and a lot of it comes down to knowing where each person's source is. So for myself, I had 2 miscarriages, and then I was like, oh my goodness, I need to figure out what I need to do differently. And so
Right.
we had been going through a renovation with tons of exposures to all kinds of horrible toxins. And
Yeah.
so we needed to do a detox. And so we just, did a deep dive on making sure that we were introducing healthy nutrients through the diet that wouldn't be depleting our healthy nutrients in the body, but then also just allowing the body to be eliminating them really well.
Mm. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your secret sauce. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining me today. This was an awesome conversation. I had several moments of like, pew, if I could do the emoji, like the mind blown emoji, that was me. So I appreciate that. And thank you so much for the amazing work that you're doing in the world.
Oh, well, thank you for hosting me. This has been really fun to be able to share on all of these concepts and talk to someone who's equally passionate about this topic.
Yes. Where will people find you? Where is the best place for people to connect?
So my clinic is called the Freeman Clinic in Toronto. So you can look at thefreemanclinic.ca. I'm also Ask Dr. Freeman on TikTok. And for our listeners, if they are interested in a free gift, which is a home audit, they can go to thefreemanclinic.ca for a limited time and get a free download on where to start with their home.
Cool. And we will include that link in the show notes for all of you that are listening in. Thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to hearing all of your incredible wisdom and tips coming up.
Thanks, Alama. Take care.
Thanks. Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.